Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Communicative Leader. I'm your host, Dr. Leah O. Today, we're going to do a best of the rest of season 9. And this season, we hit a massive milestone, episode 100. And today, I want to take time, like we do at the end of every season, and have this deliberate pause where we look back at the wisdom that emerged from the conversations this past season. And we have hosted brilliant minds this season, really world-class leaders, researchers, legal minds, organizational practitioners, Dr. Jen Fry, Norman Wolfe, Bishop Kevin Foreman, Justin Ricklefs, Bianca Reimer, Hannah Halls Kutchner, Emma Gibbons, and Dr. Rosina McAlpine. Singular, undeniable trend connects every hour of tape we recorded. Traditional command and control corporate structures are completely failing to keep modern teams engaged. So we know that today's organizations are paying a tangible, quiet, and incredibly costly tax. It's this invisible line on your profit and loss statement, your P&L, and it happens when senior leadership prioritizes the superficial politeness or rigid power distance over clarity, genuine compassion, and true conflict literacy. We see it every day in our consulting work. Teams that smile in a meeting, but only dismantle the strategy in private text threads 5 minutes later. We have to stop treating people like interchangeable cogs in a machine. We have moved past that, my friends. We have to stop treating culture like it's this compliance checklist to escape legal liability. We have to stop treating parenting and personal life as the silent second shift employees have to hide the moment they clock into work. And we certainly have to stop pretending that leaders can magically separate who they are as human beings from how they show up to lead. So, in this retrospective episode, we're going to fully map out this new framework and design to turn organizational communication into your strategic asset. We're going to talk about how to drive decision velocity, protect organizational value, dismantle that myth of professional detachment, and really build a system on fairness. Whether you hold an executive title in the C-suite or you're leading from where you sit in the organization, this best of the rest of season 9 is for you. Let's dive in. So let's start with the foundation, how we show up as leaders and how we establish our core messaging. In a session I really loved with Bishop Kevin Foreman, he introduced a profound concept, this idea of shalom. Now, in Western corporate spaces, we often throw around the word peace as if it simply means, maybe the absence of noise or the absence of very clear fighting or tension. But Bishop Foreman challenged us to look at this ancient root of shalom, which means a state where nothing is missing, nothing is broken, and nothing is lacking. Think about that in the context of your organization, in the context of communication. When a leader operates from a state of internal shalom, they aren't panicked, they aren't defensive, they aren't trying to overcompensate with ego. Too often, we trap ourselves and our teams in these rigid, kind of sterile boxes. We subtly ask our employees to pull off exhausting performative character shifts the moment they log on to Slack or walk into a meeting. Tell them, leave your personal life, leave your unique background, leave those emotions at the door. But authentic leadership demands that you bring 100% of who you are into the space you occupy. Why? Because as Bishop Foreman beautifully reminded us, more is caught than taught. Your team will never fully internalize your corporate values by reading a laminated poster in the break room or scrolling through that corporate memo. They don't learn culture from text. They learn it from behavior. They catch your work ethic, your emotional regulation under pressure, your discipline, your genuine values by watching how you behave in the moment of crisis. If you preach collaboration but really practice gatekeeping, they're going to catch that gatekeeping every single time. And this brings us to a major communication pitfall we see during brand overhauls, mergers, culture shifts, relying really heavily on those loose, inspiring future state vision statements that are really detached from our day-to-day operational reality. To borrow a phrase from the EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System Framework, vision without integration is hallucination. right? Minute to let that sink in. Vision without integration is hallucination. When a massive gap exists between your lofty executive vision and the messy daily performance of your frontline workers, all we do is create an information vacuum. As communication scholars know all too well, human beings, we don't tolerate an information vacuum well or for very long. We want to know the truth. So if we don't know the truth, we will naturally fill in that empty space. Oftentimes, negative stories, worst case scenarios, and anxiety. So, our true radical clarity is not micromanagement. In fact, micromanagement is the anxious cousin of ambiguity. True clarity is an act of deep kindness. It establishes strict, unyielding guardrails that grant employees agency to innovate and run really fast within those boundaries we set. If we think about Justin Rickleffs, he highlights that modern leadership requires the ability of an amoeba, right? That's shifting the focus from a rigid command and control to a role that adapts to environments where your team resides. When you prioritize giving a damn, actively demonstrating curiosity, compassion, consistency, you aren't being soft. You are creating a competitive advantage. Remember, employees are highly perceptive. If they don't see their leaders genuinely invested in the human aspect of work, they're going to comply only until they find a better option. And oftentimes, my friend, that better option is outside of your organization. So if you want to operationalize this clarity starting tomorrow morning, I want you to implement two distinct mental models. One, I want you to acknowledge the source. If you roll out a new initiative and your team peppers you with endless questions, repetitive questions, I really want you to try and fight that urge to get frustrated. Don't assume they're being resistant. Don't assume they're being dense. Recognize that you are the common denominator. And my friends, I know this is hard. I know this in my role as a teacher, as an educator, right? There are times I can feel so frustrated. Like we just went over this assignment. Why are there so many questions? Why are we going over this over and over? But then I realize, this is probably me. These are smart people sitting here in my classroom. I must have made some assumptions. I must not have communicated clearly. So, if your team is confused, the messaging is simply not clear enough yet. Take ownership of that communication breakdown. Take a step back and kind of reframe and re anchor that narrative for them. I also want you to try and embrace this both and mindset. We need to reject this antiquated binary notion that leaders have to choose between caring for their humans, the humans on their team, and looking at the output, right? Being only performance driven. So if we cultivate radical clarity, it supports the bottom line. It removes that structural hesitation. People know what's expected of them and they can move a lot faster. When you are focusing on progress over perfection, right, we're going to recognize that we're going to keep moving forward. Whereas that good plan consistently and clearly executed today is going to beat that perfect. I'm doing this in quote marks because my mind, perfect doesn't exist. But it will beat that perfect plan that sits dead on a slide deck for 6 months every single time. So now I want us to think about shifting paradigms in the infrastructure of conversation. So to build on that operational momentum we just talked about, now we're going to look at how we can shift our paradigms. In our deep dive episode with organization consultant Norman Wolf, he challenged us to abandon what he calls the legacy of the machine paradigm. And for over a century, since the Industrial Revolution, businesses have really treated organizations like complicated machines. Under this flawed and outdated model, employees are viewed as static components, right? We've all heard that term cog before. This cog to be manipulated, to be oiled, to be replaced when they wear out. But a human system is not a machine. It's a living organism. High performance isn't a mechanical output that you force when we pull a lever. It is a direct factor of our organization's capacity. It's the sum of all of our technical expertise and our collective emotional maturity. So Norman mapped out 3 vital fields of an organizational ecosystem that leaders must learn to read like a map. He called them the three fields of energy or fields of value. So we have one, our activity field, right, where we have clear goals, we have metrics, we have efficient processes. We have a relationship field where we have kind of the synchronized energy, we have trust, we're supporting one another. And then third, the context field, really looking at the culture, the historical narratives. So I want to break these down more thoroughly now. So if we're thinking of that activity field, this is your visible work. These are your clear goals, your KPIs, your project management boards, right? Your smooth, your efficient processes. Most bad managers are going to invest 100% of their time here. They're going to get stuck in this lower level field. Now let's move up to the second field, relationship. This is that synchronized energy where team members feel genuinely supported, they feel understood, they feel seen, they feel acknowledged. It's kind of that invisible tissue that connects your team members. If this field is toxic, my friends, your activity field is going to stall out no matter how good your software or your product is. Third field, context field, deepest layer. It is the collective kind of DNA, historical narrative of the organization. It's kind of the unwritten story of how things actually work around here. As a senior leader, your specific communication style, particularly your ability to remain clear and calm and grounded under heavy fire, this serves as your value protection mechanism. It's your armor, right? So, to navigate this, Norman said that we have to move past this forced alignment, right? Just the fancy word for compliance, and start striving for contribution agreements. We have to explicitly invite people to choose how they want to actively contribute, right? How are you using your unique gifts, your unique strengths to contribute to the success of the whole? And this ties perfectly into what global strategist Emma Gibbons shared on the show. Culture lives in conversation, not in posters and not in policies. She reminded us that policy is just a blueprint, but how an organization actually converses is how that blueprint becomes a living, breathing infrastructure. Emma warned us to watch out for major signs that a culture is failing or merely kind of stated, again, those policy statements, those posters, rather than practiced. Major sign, over politeness, which she describes as a transactional shell. It's lacking that rich honesty, um, that vibrancy that ties people together. Another warning sign, strategic fog. And this is where an organization claims to have 10 priorities, when by definition, you can only have one priority above all others. Finally, watch out for innovation theory, or theater rather. Those hollow retreats where employee input is gathered but never actually used. And that really leads to eroding a caustic effect on your team's trust. We're wasting their time. To keep these dynamics running smoothly, we must avoid that silent tax that senior leaders pay when groups are and dynamics are mismanaged. Let's look at how these kind of taxes manifest across three strategic focus areas. First, 100 days of leadership. When a new executive steps into their role under intense pressure to deliver results, they usually fall into one of two traps. Either one, they're too loud, too aggressive, too defensive, treating every legacy process as a fight to be won. Okay. Or two, they hold back entirely to analyze data in isolation, and that creates a lot of uncertainty in their team and in the organization. So, what is the pivot then, right? If we don't want to come on too strong, we don't want to be too quiet either. I want you to balance active listening with early, high value, low friction contributions. I want you to focus on building genuine relationships across the org chart before you actually need to leverage those relationships for resources, for budget, for political capital, right? Two, meeting management as culture. Let's be honest, running meetings over their allotted time limits, doing all the talking, or allowing for continuous, those non constructive or circulary commentary, this is stalling your innovation. This is frustrating your employees. Hannah Hulse-Kelchner pointed out that meeting management can tell you huge things about your organization's true health. She wants you to manage time with a very rigorous discipline. Break meetings into distinct phases so decisions are locked in real time instead of saving broad, open ended questions for the last 2 minutes, right? We've all been in those meetings. Okay, I finished reporting out to you. We have 2 minutes left. What questions do you have? What do we need to know? Instead, I want you to invite descriptive, targeted questions throughout the process, right? This is as simple, my friends, as saying something like, how does it look from where you sit? 3, vulnerability versus authority. Displaying deep personal vulnerability in large, highly scrutinized public groups can backfire, and it can backfire catastrophically when your stakeholders are naturally anxious and looking at you for stability. I'm not saying vulnerability is bad. Definitely not saying that. I'm just saying we need to be very intentional about this. I want you to think about sharing things that are personal, not private. So, what can you do? I want you to architect your communication channels very intentionally. I want you to kind of restrict the highly vulnerable, that behind the scenes emotional connections. Do that in the one on one meetings, right? Where you can build this genuine place of trust with teammates. But in large rooms, in mediated contexts, I want you to think about maintaining that authoritative, calm, and grounded presence that is signaling compliance and safety to others. So now let's move on to physiological grounding and de escalation tactics. These were a big component of season 9. Because when we are trying to maintain that authoritative presence in a tense boardroom, it requires something that a lot of times we're not talking about in grad school or in business school, that regulation of your nervous system. Your physical grounding underpins your communication authority. In our episode with Dr. Jen Fry, she brought incredible practical insights to the table regarding culture and equity and structural trust. One of her core warnings was that employees are very savvy. They're highly intuitive. They're great at intuiting managerial behavior. Employees can spot an executive who is performative, who is anxious, and who is ungrounded from a mile away. So if your body language is screaming panic while your mouth reads a script about confidence, your team is going to believe your body 100% of the time. If you feel your authority slipping in a heated meeting, and this doesn't mean command, it means your ability to remain rooted in your titled position, in your experiences. But if you're feeling like that confidence is slipping, maybe it's an aggressive stakeholder that's cornering you, or maybe a project launch has gone sideways, then our heart rate starts to spike and our breathing can become shallow. It's what our cortisol levels are doing. They are soaring. So to combat that, you can use a very practical physiological reset called the belly button reset. And as Bianca Reimer suggests, we have to dismantle that artificial barrier that asks employees, leave yourself at the door, leave your personal life at the door. When we treat culture as kind of this transactional pizza party rather than a byproduct of how we're actually treated, we fail. True connection happens when leaders stop hiding behind corporate scripts and start having real human, empathetic conversations. So if your leadership style is relying on a sterile, detached communication, you're paying a tax in the form of low trust and likely high turnover. As you pivot, ask yourself, am I leading in a way that makes my team feel seen? Or am I just managing the output? Bianca often describes leaders as lighthouses. When you carry clouds of resentment or detachment, your light is obscured. Your team can't find their way to you, no matter how bright your technical skills are. So let's go back to that belly button breathing. Most corporate professionals, most adults really, tend to breathe entirely from their upper chest when we're stressed. This sends a biological signal to our brain that we're under some form of attack. At the belly button reset, it forces us to shift our focus to a deep abdominal breathing. You breathe deeply into your belly rather than your chest. I want you to expand that belly fully on the inhale, drawing it back sharply on the exhale. This simple mechanical shift physically relaxes your solar plexus, it downregulates your nervous system, it projects an authentic presence to the room, and it anchors you to your business gut instinct, right? It bridges your cold, logical strategy with deep empathy. Once you are physically grounded, you can handle that verbal friction. When a meeting becomes intensely heated, when it turns personal, effective leaders, we're not letting that slide. We're going to nip that behavior in the bud by naming the specific problematic action immediately rather than relying on kind of vague passive aggressive reprimands later. And Dr. Jen Fry, she noted that true innovation requires high level of conflict literacy. Leaders must actively possess the skills to navigate tension, reject that toxic politeness, and lean into hard conversations before that small spark becomes a raging forest fire. Now, if we're thinking about Hannah Halls Couchner, she backed this up in her session. She identified poor conflict management as one of the primary hidden norms that betray workplace fairness. Leaders avoid conflict because it can be awkward, right? Because we can fear emotional breakdowns, but avoidance, my friends, it is only causing the underlying issue to metastasize. So here is your exact go-to phrasing for real-time de-escalation, drawing on Hannah's strategy of implementing an objective structural timeout. Right. So when you're in this meeting and it has lost its guardrails, you can say something like this. I understand you're frustrated, John, but we're not going to make this personal in this room. We need to take a structural pause right now so the temperature can come down. So we're going to hit pause. We're going to reconvene in 10 minutes. And I want both of us to write down what we think is the core issue and how to solve it so we can look at them side by side and objectively. So, what does this script do? It really acts as a powerful structural timeout. It allows both sides to step out of their emotional triggers, isolate the exact point of technical disconnect, and protect the professional relationship from long-term damage. Another critical skill is learning how to ask highly challenging but diagnostic questions without triggering defensiveness. What's the secret? Ban the word why from your vocabulary during a crisis. Think about it. From the time we're toddlers, the question, why did you do that, really carries a heavy connotation of a reprimand. Feels like being sent to the principal's office, right? It instantly triggers our psychological defense mechanisms. Instead, think about how to frame your analytical question using open ended, curious stems. What is the strategic rationale for taking this path rather than the alternative options we discussed? Or maybe what variables made us look at the data through this specific lens? By changing why to what, you shift the energy of the conversation from an interrogation to, again, this collaborative side-by-side problem-solving session. So this brings us to rebuilding trust via systematic fairness and shared realities. As we move into kind of a final core framework that emerged in season 9, I'm going to bring in the brilliant legal and corporate paradigm shared by Hannah Halls Ketchner. Fairness is not charity. Fairness is smart, highly lucrative business. Trillions of dollars are lost globally every single year to disengagement because well-meaning corporate culture initiatives, they treat human relationships as kind of half-baked transactions rather than deep social contracts. But what Hannah did is she reminded us that our teams are incredibly sharp at tracking unwritten rules and monitoring equity. When they see a peer treated unfairly, their internal antenna goes up and immediately begins to wonder, am I next? Can I trust this relationship? If you want to grease the gears of your business rather than throw sand into them, you have to establish accountability as a two-way street. Accountability can't just roll downhill. It also has to roll uphill. Employees must feel safe enough to say to the leader, you aren't giving me the resources I need, or you're talking down to me in front of my reports and causing me to lose credibility. This systematic view of the workplace brings us directly to the groundbreaking work of Dr. Rosina McAlpine, creator of the WINS method. Dr. McAlpine joined us from Australia to remind us of the massive liability in modern leadership communication, the myth of a siloed life. So we're going to work through the WINS method and U is workplace systems and support mechanisms. I is individual empowerment. N, next generation impact. We're really thinking about social responsibility. And S, systemic data driven wellness. And that's where we're bringing in the ROI and feedback loops. When we force employees to pretend they don't have families, when we come to work or pretend that they don't have them or don't have work at home, we're asking them to hit this impossible, exhausting standard. This leads to burnout, to mental fatigue, and also to high turnover. But to operationalize Dr. McAlpine's WINS framework, senior leaders, you have to move past these superficial, these kind of one-off wellness perks, right? You can't tell a drowning, a parent who's overwhelmed, drowning in work to just go meditate for an hour. If you have a toddler who's peeling themselves off their leg or an emergency childcare crisis, right? True family friendly leadership requires a data driven approach. The way we would do anything else is the way that we should also view and tackle this. Segment your organizational data. When you look at stress or burnout holistically, the data kind of averages out between parents and non parents and it hides the hazards. But when you pull it apart, you see psychological risks very clearly. Dr. McAlpine shared a magnificent study from a major law firm that completely changed how their culture operated. A senior partner in the firm was launching a program for parents of children with additional needs. And instead of keeping it corporate and sterile, the partner shared his own lived experience of raising a child with multiple sclerosis. And that single act of empathetic storytelling, it got rid of the stigma of flexibility and it caused engagement to skyrocket. It made employees feel safe and seen and loyal. So, to build that high trust culture, you have to replace that standard boring status updates, right? In those meetings saying, well, there's this and this and this. Instead, you want to lean into this curiosity crusade, and that's inspired by Emma Gibbon's rule of thumb. Make it fun, make it meaningful. So, again, let's dismantle that classic corporate myth, that passive open door policy. It feels like an illusion, right? So many leaders love to say, my door is always open. And then they wonder, well, why is no one coming in? The truth, employees are often too intimidated by power distance and corporate hierarchy to even walk through that door uninvited. If you want to know what's actually happening in your organization, you can't sit there and wait. You have to be proactive. Go to the teams, cross that threshold, aggressively seek out their perspectives. At doing this, it means you have to build what Jen Fry talks about as your feel bad muscle. It's a critical growth area for empathetic, compassionate leaders. To lead effectively, you must learn to sit with that temporary personal discomfort of setting a firm boundary and resisting that urge to take action to fix it or soften the other party's feelings. It is entirely acceptable and frankly, entirely human to feel bad about a tough business decision or a firm performance boundary, but also to simultaneously recognize that it remains the best, healthiest choice for the organization long term. We can't let discomfort dilute our clarity. And finally, as you navigate the complex political landscapes of today's modern organizations, think about non strategic alliances. I want you to connect deeply with administrative professionals, facility staff, the IT desk, peers, and unrelated departments. Maybe saying why? Why does that make sense to use my time that way? These individuals provide incredibly objective support systems. They can see the organization from a different view. They're free from your media department's bias, and they offer invaluable unwritten insights into the dynamics and health of the company. Treat everyone with equal dignity, and your leadership ecosystem will begin to transform. As we close out this special season 9 retrospective, and again, kind of celebrate our 100th episode milestone, I don't want you to just listen to this, nod your head, and go back to business as usual. I want to leave you with two distinct, actionable challenges for the next 30 days. One tailored specifically for our titled leaders, again, our managers, our directors, our supervisors, and one for every single employee who's out there grinding in the trenches. So for my titled leaders, Your challenge over the next month is to go on a deliberate, silent, observational audit of how your staff actually handles friction, how they actually handle those structural, unwritten rules. Pay close attention to data points that hidden in daily conversation. What exactly do your people CC you on in emails? Are they doing it to cover their tracks or to pull you in to a minor squabble? How do they behave in a meeting when two peers fundamentally disagree on a strategy? Do they shut down or do they lean into that kind of healthy, honest debate? How quickly are critical problems brought to your desk? Are they hiding it until it explodes? Or do they trust you enough to bring it to you early on? Gathering this observational data will reveal kind of the level of conflict literacy and psychological trust in your department. Again, I want you to lead with deep, unyielding curiosity and humility. You can walk up to your reports and use Emma Gibbon's favorite phrase, tell me more, to buy yourself time to listen deeply. Or think about a Hannah core question. What do you need from me to be successful? Then sit quietly, check your ego, and accept their answers. Finally, look into setting explicit KPIs around working parent support and team well-being. Give yourself a data-driven mandate to role model boundaries. Ensure your team stays protected and whole and productive. Remember the ultimate rule of leadership. If you call the shots, you got to take the shots, as Bishop Foreman reminded us. So, my employees across all levels, your challenge for the next 30 days is twofold. First, I want you to commit to a strict, non negotiable policy of zero conflict resolution over Slack, Microsoft Teams, email, or text. Again, for my friends who are completely virtual, that might feel tricky, but then you're going to jump onto a Zoom, right? Or you're going to jump on to a FaceTime or a WhatsApp in order to be able to see people and to bring in those nonverbals. When we have these digital messaging platforms, they are great for logistics, but they can be really catastrophic for nuance. They turn private friction into a performance, adding fuel to side channel conversations and really allowing tone to be misinterpreted. The moment you feel that twinge of tension or misunderstanding in a digital thread, stop typing, right? Put those hands up, hit the brakes, pull that conversation into that face to face meeting, into the Zoom room, into direct voice interaction as quickly as possible. So, this is going to help you resolve this in a compassionate, empathetic way and a clean, productive way as well. Second, is both Emma and Hannah emphasized, never isolate yourself in a professional situation. Build a trusted external sounding board, a third party reality check, right? This helps you to have some objective validation when you feel caught in unwritten corporate games or rules. Staying true to your values, it protects your mental tank. You recognize that your voice, your work, and your character are worthwhile. So, thank you all for being part of this incredible journey. I really enjoyed season 9. I hope that you did too. And I thank you again into tuning into episode our 100 episode celebration. Again, we can't fix what we don't talk about. So go forth with curiosity and courage. We need to stop building those rigid corporate machines and start cultivating human ecosystems that actually thrive.